Alright, so here I want to look at a line in the Caro-Kann Tartakower variation where white declines taking the knight on f6. This does happen a fair number of times in the at the club level. We suggest you play h5. That's very thematic anytime a knight is on like g3, g6, b3, b6. The opposite side a lot of times wants to try and chase that knight with a flank pawn. Now white's probably going to play h4. That's really his best move. And here in the ChessGoals course, we suggest that you play bishop g4 right away, which is a great move. But I want to offer an alternative where we play c5. And the reasons for c5 are that we're trying to undermine the center right away. c5 is very thematic in a lot of Caro-Kann variations. And we also get the natural c6 square back for our knights to develop too. And in a lot of lines, we might also get an attack against white. And the more open lines we have, the more potent that attack can become. So let's start with c5. The most natural move, really the best move for white here, is probably knight f3, developing and defending the pawn. We're going to play knight c6, which is, again, part of the reason for playing c5. And again, the best move and most natural move for white is probably bishop e3, developing and defending the pawn. At this point, we're going to go ahead and clarify the center. We're going to take the d-pawn. White's probably going to take with the knight. Wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to just give us a bishop pair for no reason. And now we're going to play bishop g4. So this will look very familiar, very similar to what we offer in the ChessGoals course, but the difference being that we've clarified the center a little bit, and we have another piece in the game with more open lines. White can't really ignore this. Obviously, he can't ignore it entirely. We take the queen, but he can't counterattack our queen, because if he tries to counterattack our queen, we're just going to take, and the rook has to take here, and then we're going to take the rook, and the knight's hanging, and the bishop's hanging, and we're up in exchange here. So we're much better. The engine doesn't say we're quite winning yet, but I think in practical terms, black is winning. He's up in exchange. Should be able to win this and convert this most games. But I don't think you're going to see that. I think what's going to happen is that either the queen's going to move, one of these squares, bishop's going to block, or the pawn's going to block. And in particular, I want to look at what happens when the pawn blocks. So here we have a shocking move. We can actually just ignore this and play queen b6. Here, I think in a lot of your games, white's going to try and call our bluff and take the bishop, but hint, this is not a bluff. So right off the bat, we're hitting this bishop. Now this knight is attacked twice by our queen and knight, and defended twice by the queen and bishop, so the bishop has to continue defending this knight. And the only place the bishop can stay defending the knight where it can't be captured, because it can be taken on these two squares, is g1. So that's really the best move for white. And at this point, we're now going to queenside castle. So when we queenside castle, what this is going to do is it's going to get our king to safety, and it's going to use the fact that we have these open lines, and we're immediately pinning this knight to this queen, right? So sure, they're x-raying our queen, but they can't really move this knight because we take their queen with check. And what we're threatening is we're just threatening e5. The knight's pinned to the queen, we're going to get our piece back, have a much more pleasant game. Their king's in the center and ours isn't. So, if white plays c3, we just play e5. I do think in a good number of games you're going to see them play this move, though. Knight takes h5. And the reason is I think your opponents are going to look at this and see, oh, hey, I'm up a piece, and I'm threatening to take this knight with check. So even if black takes one piece back, I can take another piece, still be up a piece, and I'll be winning. And in fact, in many lines that would be true, but we have another shocking move, and that's e6. And then there's 2 points to e6. One is that when white takes this knight, it's not with check. And 2 is that we can get another piece in the game. So here, let's say white takes the knight. I think that's the most natural looking move. We have a winning advantage, and with only one move, and that's queen b4 check. So the idea of this is to lure the c-pawn forward, so that after we take on b2, and the rook moves, we can also take on c3 with check. So we've gotten 2 pawns for our 2 pieces. Clearly that's not enough by itself, but white's king is stuck in the middle. This knight, in a lot of lines, is just dropping. Not right away, but in a lot of cases it will be. And at that point, we're not even down that much material with a huge attack. For example, white can't block with this rook here, because we'll just play bishop g4, and that rook is pinned to the king, and we're going to be easily winning there. The king can't go to f2. If he does, well, then that removes a defender from this knight, and we'll just take that knight right away. So really only decent move for white is king e2, where we still play bishop b4. The main point of this is that any kind of checks that we give along this rank, this rook cannot easily block now. It also covers some good squares from the king. So like even if our queen moves somewhere, like the king can't just try and hide back in that initial square. And here, this is a position where I'd really encourage you to play around with the engine and look at the different lines. But I would say in a practical game, if you reach this position, you're going to be winning 80, 90% of your games because this is just so hard for white to defend. He's probably going to drop some material somewhere, and that's going to make it where white's not even up that much material. And our king is going to be way safer than his king. This just becomes really, really hard for white to play. In fact, with best play by both sides, black wins this every time. The engine gives a decisive advantage to black. I'll look at what the engine suggests is the best defense, which is queen g3. I don't even know if this is actually the move you're likely to see, but I think a more likely move might be something like rook h3, because white's thinking, hey, I'm going to get another piece into the game. That's the only way I'm going to survive. But after like queen b2 check, and the king has to step up somewhere. Let's say here, so he's not stepping on the toes of this bishop. Well, that just hangs the royal fork. Let's say he steps up here. Well, that interrupts the defense, so we can just take this. It might look like, okay, I have enough defenders, but no, this pesky bishop pins the rook to the king, and then again, we're just getting our material back. There's really nothing good here for white. He doesn't have any other options. The only 3 legal moves here. I mean, I guess he can block that, but we're just gonna take it. Same thing here. We're just gonna take. So rook h3 just loses on the spot after this queen b2 check. So let's look at queen g3. That's probably the most resistant try that white has, but we can just take this knight. Now, if the queen would love to trade, but you'll notice he's in check, and if they take, so let's look at bishop takes first. This is actually much worse for white. Again, we have a check on this rank. And here, you'll notice the bishop is cutting off these squares. The king doesn't have anywhere to go, and we just pick up the rook. So that's pretty easy. What happens if the rook takes? Well, if the rook takes, again, another check along this rank. See this thematic idea? This bishop is doing such a good job of cutting off these squares for the rook and the king, making these checks along this this second rank here very deadly. King steps up somewhere, and here again we can just take this piece. And it doesn't really matter if the king steps up here. This is even worse because he's interrupting the bishop's defense. So we can just take this. There's just, again, this is the best line the computer gives, and he's just giving this up. Bishop could take here, but we could take right back. And even if white tries something like this, you might be thinking, oh, hey, he's still up material, and he's hitting my rook, he's hitting my queen, I'm running out of pieces. But the king is so exposed. We have checks. So queen d5 check, and we're hitting this knight twice. It's not even defended. So it's like, where does white go? He's just going to drop the piece. Doesn't matter where he goes, right? Because he could add a defender, but we're just going to take this. Actually, we even have mate. So, any line you look at, white is losing. I encourage you to play around this with an engine. But I think if you just remember up to this point, and if you actually reach this in a game, you're going to win 80-90% of your games. And if you think about this in a very practical level, again, we're very likely to get one of these pieces back quite easily, where we're only down one point of material at that point, and we have a much safer king than white's king. And I think anyone, if you show them that position, they're going to choose black.